So, kind of just to give a little bit of more background for what my life struggles have been. Um, I am an only girl of four boys and from an Egyptian family. A little bit of history about Egypt. It is, well, right now the population of Coptics to Muslim, um, I don't even know what it is, but currently the Coptic population is a little bit, I was going to say younger, but smaller. So, just based on that and the fact that our original history involved the pharaoh, um, it almost kind of discusses and illuminates for itself the kind of mindset that we have and that we're trying to kind of outrun. So, I'm trying to kind of grasp an idea that is in the Quran and is something that I alluded to in the past about how some doctrines or laws might have been enforced for a specific time. Um, but that's mostly because the communities were primitive. And with the evolution of time, we become civilized and we are more almost normalized to more egalitarian ways of existing and thinking. So I'm going to put this out there. I was part of a community on Facebook several weeks ago, and I kind of left it maybe after joining by just a few days. And it was talking about how I think in South Asian communities, how to raise children in a way that's kind of permissible. The word halal was used, and it's almost to kind of, I think, uh, almost communicate like, is there a way to kind of promote the prophet's way of living in the contemporary world? So, to my understanding, I just went right to Taoism because it was almost like, okay, we're kind of like in a postmodern world right now. And if I was to put myself in someone's shoes who's maybe 8 or 9 right now, my struggles are going to be against you as parents. Like, I'm not going to lie about that. I'm going to be having a difficult time assuming that it's wrong to play video games, for example. It's wrong to watch um, videos that or video or play video games or engage in video games that look like they have violence in them, because as a boy I want to wrestle. I have that extra energy. What I need to understand is that violence is not okay, and you need to help me understand that by being somebody who doesn't promote violence. So you can almost wonder, like, how do parents promote violence? And it's just that it's almost in not listening to children's voices about what their needs are. It's a type of abuse. It's almost like a reverse neglect, right? So it's almost like, this is what I want as a parent, and this is what you're going to do. And so that becomes a cycle of abuse that promotes itself forward. And the prophet was not like that at all. Like, even when it came time for him to actually um, judge a thing, he refused, and he was almost waiting for some kind of inspiration or revelation from God, because he was just like, this is such like a monumental point in, like, in any kind of person's life, to have to judge on a thing. And I already am a prophet, so what precedent is this going to set for the future for anybody who wants to assume that they're like a prophet or that they have this direct inspiration from God? So it's for this reason that he used to actually pray for revelation from God in the form of uh, an archangel visiting him and kind of giving him an answer. And that's what the Quran basically is. It's basically a collection of all of those scenarios where there was some kind of indecision and the prophet was asked a question or had to kind of judge a thing. And so sometimes God will just give a direct revelation, and he'll just say, like, for example, there's a chapter, it's called The Woman Who Argues. And in it, God actually directs it to her. He says, God heard the one who was arguing for herself against her husband. So imagine the weight of that, that God's saying, like, the prophet's not even an intermediary for you. Like, you can call me directly, like, just ask and you'll be inspired. So that's very powerful for us to understand, especially for people who are oppressed, men or women, because it's not to say that men aren't abused or that women aren't abused, but it's just that along a lot of Orthodox societies or communities still hold that kind of men should be the ultimate voice. And that's the context for that, is that whenever there is indecision in anything, one person should be recruited to kind of make that final decision, right? So it can be a woman and it can be a man. It's not really the point anymore. The point is that if it comes down to two people, making the final decision, it becomes a conflict because it'll just be back and forth. And then imagine the people who are less hierarchical than those two. Like, what are they supposed to do? They can't pick sides, right? So they'll often just be like, we quit. Like, we can't deal with this. It's just a very, very difficult scenario to kind of work with. So this is outside of politics. I don't understand how different government hierarchies work within democracies. I know the government system in the United States is a little bit different than the one in Canada, so I'm not even going to study them or compare them. I'm just going to leave that for those who are in the field to continue doing that, like political science or um, people who work in social policy. But it's just something to think about from a familial kind of perspective. So people who are in families and trying to understand um, a worldview from Taoism and from Confucius, which he kind of promoted a way of if you work on your independent self within a family structure, like as a father or a mother, like a parent figure, and you're trying to instill a way for your children to emulate, you don't have to really do any teaching or any kind of discipline. Just by seeing who you are, they're going to kind of grow up into that anyway. And then in so doing, it just becomes like this concentric circle that almost reverberates outwards into society and then into the world. So this is, I think, something that we struggle with when we're talking about scripture, is that we'll pull out these verses that say, for example, men should be maintainers of women. If you think 1400 years ago or 2000 years ago, what rights did women really have? They were already the weaker kind of gender or sex, depending on how you want to define those two constructs. So by nature, it was almost already, you would want to have that kind of protection. So it was almost to say, if you had two women squabbling, for example, maybe it would be a good idea to find someone who was a man who would be able to say, maybe this is like, maybe I can decide for you. But in spite of that, there was still Mary, who, in spite of, like, from the Muslim perspective, she is considered as one of the women who are over and above all women. So it was Sarah, the wife of the Prophet Ibrahim. Mary was one of them. The daughter of the Prophet Fatima was one. Um, Asiya, which was the wife of the Pharaoh, she had to put up with his hell. And then there's differences of opinion with the Prophet's last wife, Aisha, because I guess it just kind of goes to say that with education, sometimes women can be very opinionated, I guess is the word, right? So because she spent her entire life with the Prophet, she became someone who was very educated. She was very knowledgeable. Men used to go and study with her, but then there were differences of opinion with her and some of the followers of the Prophet and like the companions after the fact. And I didn't really study the battle and what happened with that tribulation that they all went through. But it goes to say that some of the insecurities that men may have around educated women is legitimate, because sometimes we'll feel like if you're just going to have that construct in your mind that you can overrule me even though I am pretty independent, then that already is a null relationship. Like what do I have to gain from this? I can find my own companionship with myself and like in some kind of devotion, and that's it. So to be able to kind of step back from that and say, well, let's make it an egalitarian relationship. Like, it doesn't have to be that two people are compatible because of their SES or the amount of knowledge that they have. If they both have that kind of devout orientation to something bigger in the universe, they're already off to a better start than if it's just, where are you on some social hierarchy? How much do I know? Is it because I'm a man or a woman that I have this right? So understanding gender roles, I think, is a good place to kind of segue into what I was planning on going through with the descriptions and attributes of God, because those attributes are across all creation, right? Like if you think of God as um, there's so many words that come to mind. I don't even want to give one, but if I was to say, for example, there's one that is the giver of talent or the giver of gifts. So it's almost like there's an intrinsic value in each unique person that God allows, right? It's called Al-Wahhab, which is a name that is almost like the bestower of bounty, right? It's almost like it helps us identify that within us. It's just all you need. It's just you and God, and some identification with the fact that if I'm able to continually rely on myself and find somebody who has that kind of outlook as well, we can build a life together, and it won't be something that looks so daunting or these constant power struggles between the two, right? So going back to children and how they might want to kind of orient themselves in an Orthodox tradition from a postmodern lens, it's almost the same thing, right? If they have one parent who's willing to kind of, okay, I'm going to step back and see what the postmodern lens is and step outside of tradition, for example. If the other parent is not on board, the children are already going to have to choose, and that's not fair to them, right? Like imagine having to say, I like the tradition because I see that it's valid in the sense that there were legitimate problems that the prophet faced and was asking for inspiration for, and we recorded it in the form of the Quran. And I need that as a reference for myself, but I need it from a postmodern lens. So I need to make it contemporary for myself. And having to choose between the two of you is almost like making me almost have to not go with my own intuition and almost throw myself out. And why should I do that? Because that already almost promotes a way of idolatry that you should just obey your parents or be submissive to your parents. It's not like that. It's a type of conviviality. Like, and God even says, like in the scripture, He says, don't, if they ask you to put up partners with God, kindly remove yourself, but still treat them with kindness. So we don't promote that in these cultures. It's almost like always listen to your parents, obey your parents, where it should be you should listen to God and find your intrinsic motivation first. And we do need to discuss this because I am ultimately responsible for your well-being until you're about 18 or something, just like these are civic laws. And after that, you're well, from 10 to 18, at least you're building a friendship now. Like you're allowing for conversation and negotiation, and you're treating them as adults as they should be treated from that age once they hit puberty. Their abstract mind is already starting to form. They want that independence already, so go with it. Like be that natural person who's effortlessly trying to understand how humans evolve and develop, and then build with it. Then you won't have those power struggles, those behaviors, that rebellion when they hit their teen years. And then, if they try something like that might look like it's sinful, or that's something obnoxious or something, then if you're talking about it already, it'll be normal to you. Like if they say, you know what, our friends are going to have drinks at a campsite, and can I go? Let's say they're 22, right? At that point, I wouldn't even say yes or no. I would say, you know what, you just go and enjoy it and see what happens when people get drunk. And then you'll feel it, because sometimes people act out of like a norm and they're not comfortable with it the next day. Sometimes they drink so much that they get sick. Sometimes they know their limit, and you can only know that by testing it. And eventually people will just kind of desist, or they'll know what my limit is, and then that's it. But if you keep things completely um, out of reach for them, they have no way of understanding how to internalize why these limits are there for us. And if they do understand why they're there, then it becomes a normal way of existing in the world with everything that might seem like it's out of reach. So some kinds of learning are not healthy, like sorcery, black magic, all these things. Once they're in the world, they're very difficult to overcome, because you're already relying on a malevolent source instead of something that's divine. And God says if you put your reliance on something that's outside of God, God's going to leave you to it. So it's going to end up controlling you in some way, and you're basically building your hell. So knowing these things are very important, and that's part of what I'm trying to do, because I feel like I have this responsibility, and it's a way also to kind of cleanse my own ideas of knowledge and how to promote a way of seeing in the world that doesn't diminish, right? Because it's almost like if darkness just continues to prevail, and I shrink back saying, I know my way has validity, but I'm not allowed to rule with it, then I have to make sure that I'm saying that this is for each individual person. And so that people in government or in these influential roles also understand the difference between the two. And then from there, we can kind of go back to a secular world, right? As it were. So one of the things that I heard yesterday, I was just listening to a recitation of one of the chapters. Um, it's called Thunder. And in it, the verse said that the day covers the night. And that really, it's so counterintuitive, because you think that darkness is cover, right? It's almost like something, when you think cover, it means something that usually covers something, which means it makes it obscure. But it's just, I don't know, it just brought to light that we do need light to uncover, and then almost wonder about, well, then what's covering? We should be that transparent with God, that our conscience is that clear, that we're just like anything goes. You can see and ask anything about me, and it's that clear conscience that gives you that confidence in the world and confidence in the universe. And once you align in that way, you're just you're it's people call this word like enlightened. Like you don't really have anything to pull you back or deter you from trying to understand something, because nothing's out of bounds or out of limits. Like if it's there in the world, you're encouraged to try to figure what it is out, unless it's said that you shouldn't. So playing with jinn is like that. It's like raising the dead, right? If you already understand that rebirth is a thing, then you would know why you shouldn't, because you're already affecting someone's life in some form, be it animal, like it's essentially being, essentially, right? So having that outlook to begin with, I think can realign people with a new outlook in ways that maybe they didn't think about, or that they didn't think they'd be allowed to think about, right? So I'm going to stop there, and hopefully this will begin a new series on just family relations and how to understand how to be an independent person within a family unit without disrespecting anybody, and allowing every idea to kind of prevail in its own right to promote diversity, and then how to kind of negotiate ideas around that, especially with big families where there are a lot of siblings and different genders and they have different identities forming, and you want to almost respect each individual for themselves while maintaining a sort of family unit that's somehow got a common aim of maintaining relationships throughout their life.